Let me begin by thanking the organizers of Africa Energy Week, in particular my dear friend, where is he? NJ. NJ Ayuk, a proud African, a proud friend of OPEC, which we at OPEC are very proud to have as a friend, a collaborator with Africa and OPEC, a bridge builder between Africa and OPEC. Thank you, NJ, and your team, and I'd like to give him a round of applause if you don't mind. I'm honored, NJ, to be invited every year to this event. Even after I retire, I want you to invite me to this event. Of course, I cannot think of a more pristine location to host this event than here in South Africa, in Cape Town, a beautiful city I came to the first time in 1995, many, many years ago. Of course, the city's splendid mix of natural beauty and rich history make it one of the world's great treasures. My compliments also go to the organizers for the timely program that has been developed for this year's event, and for the excellent arrangements and, of course, the warm hospitality. I can surely say that Africa Energy Week continues to go from strength to strength and is now truly a leading global energy industry event. I'm extremely pleased to see many OPEC's heads of delegations here, His Excellency Senator Heineken Lokpobiri of Nigeria, one of our leading and largest African member countries. Senator Heineken, it's great to see you here. We also have His Excellency Marcel Abiké, the Minister of Gabon, the President of this year for the OPEC Ministerial Conference, and many other heads of delegations who will be joining us soon. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'd like to just take a few minutes now of your time to share with you OPEC's views on the global oil and energy markets and some key issues impacting the oil and gas industry globally, but more importantly here in Africa. I think you all saw the video. We just launched the World Oil Outlook a few weeks ago, showing the main highlights and aspects of where we in OPEC and our research team see the future of this industry. Of course, many of that research has been done by the colleagues sitting here in front of you. Great team we have in the Secretariat of almost 65 analysts that look at every bit of information you have around the world, whether it's related to Africa, Asia, demand, supply, economy, future trends. All of that's incorporated into the short summary video that we just showed you. As far as the future of oil and gas is concerned, I'd like to clearly say that OPEC has a very positive outlook. We see a bright future ahead with significant opportunities for robust long-term growth. To give a few examples, I would like to share a few statistics from the World Oil Outlook. Number one, we see global energy demand rising by 24% from now to 2050. This will be fueled by a world economy that is expected to more than double in size from $165 trillion in 2023 to $360 trillion by 2050. Number three, importantly, driving this economic growth is the rapidly expanding world population, expected to reach 9.7 billion by 2050 from currently 8 billion. And most of this growth, ladies and gentlemen, will be in developing countries, non-OECD, including, of course, in Africa here. Number four, urbanization globally will continue to intensify. Over the next 6 years only, to 2030, over 500 million, nearly 600 million people are expected to move into new cities all around the world, including here in Africa. This urbanization drive will require the addition, and this is just to put this number into context, of approximately 105 cities around the world the size of Cape Town. Now let's just imagine what 105 cities the size of Cape Town, where we are here today, what that means in terms of energy requirements. By 2050, ladies and gentlemen, more than 6.6 billion people around the world will be living in cities. These trends only make one thing crystal clear to those who like to believe it and to those who don't like to believe it. It will be clear that the world is going to be needing all forms of energy. And I want to underline the word all. All forms of energy will be required, ladies and gentlemen. It's not one or the other, it's all. Oil and gas, of course, are set to remain the predominant fuels in the energy mix, retaining a share of nearly 55% of the global energy mix still by 2050, with oil retaining close to 30% and gas around 24% of the global energy mix. Now, of course, to ensure the security of supply and stability of these supplies to fuel this demand, our industries will need to invest and will need to boost investment levels significantly in the years to come. According to the research we have done at OPEC, cumulative oil-related investment requirements from now to 2050 only for the oil industry will amount to 17.4 trillion US dollars. That's almost 640 billion per year from now to 2050. Of course, the bulk of this will be in the upstream industry, where total investment needs are around $14.2 trillion, while downstream and midstream are estimated to require 1.9 trillion and 1.3 trillion respectively. And I'm really pleased to see this important issue being integrated into this theme of this year's Africa Energy Week. Invest in African energies, energy growth through an enabling environment. What an appropriate theme. Securing this vital funding is essential to maintaining security of supply and, more importantly, to avoid the unwanted volatility in global energy prices. For Africa, in the ground, the future looks bright. It has an estimated 120 billion barrels of proven reserves of oil and around 18 trillion standard cubic feet proven reserves of natural gas. It's vital that African countries can develop these resources with access to necessary funding and technology and financing, of course. This will be vital for the economic and social development of these nations in Africa and their peoples. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, in 5 days, COP29 will get underway in Baku, Azerbaijan. OPEC and its member countries, the majority of which, 6 of which are in Africa, will be at Baku to help promote fair and balanced climate and energy outcomes. Our goal is clear. We want to ensure the voices of all our member countries are well heard and that the unique circumstances of developing nations are taken well into consideration and well respected. The fact is, as you all know, that still today billions of people around the world are playing energy catch-up. They don't have access to the modern energy services that many of us have. For these people, many of whom call African continent home, talk about achieving net zero is neither a priority nor a reality. They are focused on simpler things, like simply attaining basic energy requirements, like access to electricity and access to clean cooking solutions. They want to light their homes. They want to figure out how to be able to move freely and be transported easily around from place to place. Thus, on the energy of poverty issue, ladies and gentlemen, we really at OPEC always continue to urge world leaders to unite, to advocate for necessary support and resources to make the difference in addressing this important issue. At COP29, OPEC and its member countries will be actively engaged to advocate for a balanced and fair process, particularly with regard to climate finance and technology, and one which continues to take into account the important principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. This is crucial for Africa to ensure that any future energy pathways meet the unique needs of its citizens. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished friends and colleagues, looking ahead, I'd like to emphasize that OPEC will continue to prioritize dialogue and cooperation with all its energy partners, of course, including our partners here in Africa. In this regard, we look forward to today's OPEC Africa roundtable later on. This will take place after a video presentation of the World Oil Outlook. The roundtable will allow us to delve deeper into some of the key energy opportunities and challenges that Africa particularly is facing, but also globally. I look forward to engaging discussions with our friends, our colleagues, the ministers from the OPEC member countries, and I hope you'll all be staying around to enjoy that discussion. With that, I'd like to thank you all again for listening to me, to my colleagues, and I wish you all a very successful Africa Energy Week. Thank you.
OPEC and Africa is like peanut butter and jelly. They get along very well. And Your Excellency, I would start with you. There are always discussions about how OPEC makes its decisions and the role of African players in these decisions. I think for the audience, can you take us through your decision-making process and how your African members, or all members, because they're all equal, are involved in whatever decision OPEC gets to take as an organization?
Well, thank you, NJ. That's a great question. Just before I start addressing it, because it's a very simple process. All members are equal. That's the simplicity of it, the beauty of it, since the statute of OPEC. But before I get into more details, I'm honored to be on this panel discussion with His Excellency Senator Lokbo Biri, of course, and our president, I call him my boss, His Excellency Marcel Abeke, Minister of Gabon, and of course you, NJ, as you said, the relationship between Africa and OPEC, the inception of the idea, the concept of developing OPEC, as you saw in the video, was actually in Cairo, Egypt in 1959. That then went on to become a formalized agreement to create this organization in Baghdad in September 1960. But Africa has its roots in OPEC since it was created. We have today 6 member countries. Half of our organization, half of our members are African countries. We have had so many African civil servants, whether be it their ministers or be it secretaries general, who have represented OPEC in the best way over its history, throughout its history. The latest being my dear brother, Mohammed Barkindo, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And I have personally had the honor to be welcomed in all our member countries since I took office in August 2022. In fact, the first country I visited as an official visit was Equatorial Guinea. And my brother, Minister Gabriel, at that time Minister of Petroleum in Equatorial Guinea, welcomed me. I really felt home. He took me to see His Excellency the President, His Excellency the Prime Minister, various ministers, and everybody was asking, why are you going to Equatorial Guinea first? Why don't you go to your own country, Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or Iran? I said, you know why? Because I have to go and visit my boss first. And yes, Equatorial Guinea in that year was the president of the OPEC conference. And you know what? Equatorial Guinea, with all due respect, if you allow me, Your Excellency, to say, is the smallest producer amongst our member countries. Yet, because of the beauty of the way OPEC operates, the smallest producer can also become the president of the OPEC group. And that was Equatorial Guinea in 2022. It was Congo in 2023. And this year, 2024, it is Gabon. This is how OPEC operates, where no big producer can take over the role of a small producer, and no small producer can take the role of a big producer. We all operate on equal footing and equal basis. And that's why every country has an equal voice when decisions are made, be it at the Board of Governors, be it in the Economic Commission Board, or be it at the highest level, which is the Ministerial Conference. So this year, His Excellency, the Minister of Gabon, is the president of OPEC, being the Ministerial body, the highest body in OPEC. The Board of Governors, we had the Governor of Nigeria, still he is the chairman of the Board of Governors. So African countries are involved in every step of the way in making decisions. We have a great group of African and from various member countries, employees working in the OPEC Secretariat throughout the years, but still currently. We have with us here Dr. Gwandu from Nigeria. He's the PR coordinator. Come closer, Dr. Gwandu. Let everyone see you. That's Dr. Gwandu. We have Irene Atiobio. Please stand up, Irene. Irene runs the Energy Studies Department. We have also Suraj Matori. Where is Suraj? Suraj is here. He's also working in the public relations team. And many, many others from Algeria, from Equatorial Guinea, from Gabon, who all serve proudly in OPEC, and we are proud to have them as valuable members of the organization. This is to give you a flavor, to add to the flavor of the peanut butter and jelly, and I didn't have breakfast, now you're making me feel hungry, so you owe me peanut butter and jelly after this. But in simplistic terms, all decisions in OPEC are made by consensus. Has to be a full consensus. His Excellency Senator Lokbobiri can testify to this, the President as well. And when members sit and discuss, everybody talks very transparently and very openly, and we discuss market conditions. If a decision is related to market, then the decision is taken by consensus. At the Board of Governors as well, majority decisions are required, whether it's for appointment of staff, whether it's approval of budget. So in every aspect of how the organization is run, decisions are always discussed openly, transparently, and everybody has a say.
Senator Heineken, there has always been discussions around African states meeting their OPEC quotas and also being able to produce hydrocarbons without restrictions. Nigeria as a country has always been a leading African producer. Does membership with OPEC hinder your production or gives you a chance to continue collaborating with others when it comes to producing hydrocarbons in your country?
Thank you very much. Let me first of all start by saying that Nigeria is one of the oldest members of OPEC from Africa. And OPEC is very strategic in the global energy landscape. Our membership of OPEC and the quota given to Nigeria or any country at all doesn't hinder you, from producing. If for any reason you grow some excess capacity and you overproduce at the OPEC level, OPEC will engage you, to say, look, you're overproducing. These are the likely implications of your overproduction. And so at no time has any country been hindered, from, meeting its quota or by any circumstance, overproducing. I've been in OPEC, for the past, 1 year plus. I've had occasion to be part of ministerial meetings where countries have overproduced, and OPEC is engaging them to say, look, stay within your quota. And the reason is not just your capacity to be able to produce, but also price stability and sustainability of supply chain. It's very important. There's this saying in Africa that, look, if you want to go, fast, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, you better go together. And that is why, I want to subscribe to the opinion of the president of OPEC, the minister from Gabon, that there's a lot of wisdom in belonging to OPEC. They provide strategic support to you. You see a lot of black people, Nigerians, who have been in OPEC. In fact, Nigeria has been blessed, to have a lot of people who are working in OPEC, including His Excellency, the Secretary General of Apple. He was Nigeria's OPEC governor. He worked in OPEC. He was OPEC governor to Nigeria at some point in time. I'm very sure that he was well molded to do the work he's doing as Secretary General of Apple because of the experience he got from OPEC. And bringing the experience he got there to bear. And we are benefiting from it. So to answer your question, no inhibition at all. At any point in time when there's excess capacity that you are able to, overproduce, OPEC will only engage you and see how you can remedy it. There's no inhibition at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellent Secretary General, I would like to come back to you. I think your opening remarks plus the first question. But there is always issues around the market that comes with whether it is about watching a supply glut or looking at data. I want to focus more on data. How do you use data to really encourage or enforce your decision making, whether from secondary sources or other sources? Can you take us through that process?
That's a brilliant question. But before I delve into that, I think based on what Their Excellencies just mentioned, I think it's important to, since we're here, to mention that I think if you look at history, OPEC is probably the best example of an organization that defends the interests of developing countries, whether it's OPEC itself or through our sister agency developed in 1976, the OPEC Fund for International Development. The OPEC Fund for International Development, ladies and gentlemen, is our sister organization, also based in Vienna, that does
Excellency,
social...
Are you ducking the question?
Sorry?
Are you ducking the question? You with two politicians.
No, I'm not.
You appear to be a better politician than them.
No, I'm not dodging the question. I'm still waiting for the peanut butter and jelly. That's what it is. But the OPEC Fund is another example of how OPEC plays a role in developing societies, economies, development of developing countries around the world. And you know what the beauty is of the OPEC Fund? It's the only financial institution around the world where it is not allowed to invest in its own member countries. The OPEC Fund is only allowed to invest in other countries that are non-members. So that's one. Number two, I think is important that we emphasize on a critical general theme, which His Excellency Senator Heineken mentioned. Stability of the market, as well as His Excellency the President. This is what OPEC is all about. We want stable energy prices because we want to go far, not quick, as His Excellency mentioned. OPEC does this the best. OPEC makes sure there's always stability in the market. And you know what? Most of the people around here probably are from IOCs or companies that operate in the industry. Let me say it very clearly. What we do at OPEC, our member countries, is provide stability, which is an enabling platform for you to be able to operate, whether it's in Africa or any place around the world, offshore, onshore. Without that stability that OPEC and OPEC Plus continue to provide, investments would be impossible. We have had two examples in the past. 2015-16, with the boom in shale production in the US, there was a supply glut, and OPEC stepped in with OPEC Plus and created the OPEC Plus agreement in 2017, where we brought the market back into good balance. And of course, African members of OPEC played an integral role in that process. 2020, we had COVID. Demand collapsed. There was another supply glut. OPEC Plus stepped in again to rescue the market, to be able to incentivize a platform where we have stability, to be able to get people to invest again and meet future demand. Because without these investments, the world is not going to be able to meet future demand. And these investments, ladies and gentlemen, require long lead time. It's not like turning on the tap of water. You have to decide today, get the approvals, get the investments, and then production comes on many years further down the road. So what we do at OPEC is we try to keep, through our research team, NJ, to answer your question very clearly, we have a clear radar laser focus on global economy, on global indicators for things that cause, all the matters that cause a rise in demand. Like I said, population growth, for example. We cannot deny that the world's population is going to grow. It's going to be in Africa, Middle East, Latin America, South America, the developing parts of the world. Yes, this will be countered by a stability or a decline in population probably in other parts of the world. Consumption patterns as well feed into our modeling. We have very robust models at OPEC that the research team runs. Irina works on that team in the energy studies department, where they feed all that data into our internal modeling. And you know what the beauty of OPEC is? We do our work, our number crunching, without ideology behind it. Unlike others who feed numbers and feed out reports to the people, to the general public, based on ideologically driven parameters, OPEC is all about numbers and hard data. We look at population, we look at economic growth, trade, all of that, urbanization, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. All of that leads us to one direction only, and one direction that, by the way, OPEC is not the outlier. We have many global companies and research institutes all supporting that same view, that with all these trends, the world's going to require much more energy. In fact, the only issue that we're seeing now is that people are just beginning to realize that OPEC's views on long-term energy demand growth are the more realistic ones. We see the companies like the likes of Wood Mackenzie now issuing what they call a delayed energy transition scenario, basically raising the number for demand and pushing out the so-called peak oil demand further down the horizon. And we think this is a trend that will continue to evolve. For us, as I said, we see oil demand hitting 120 million barrels a day by 2050 versus what it is today, or last year 102. This year we expect it to reach 105 in the fourth quarter, averaging around 104 million barrels a day for the whole year 2024. So we do still see robust growth in demand based on all the growth we see in India, China, Africa, many places around the world. And this is done through a very detailed mechanism using our internal modeling and our forecasting capabilities. And we've been doing this for 64 years since OPEC has been created.
Thank you, Excellency. Senator Heineken, I would like to switch this discussion a little bit. We're getting COP coming up in Baku. OPEC members are going to be hard-pressed when it comes to the issue of energy transition. And OPEC members are being seen sometimes as the culprit of the climate crisis. How are you and other OPEC members going to shape the dialogue in Baku, especially taking into consideration Nigerian and African priorities, while having those discussions that shape policies coming out of Baku that could affect, one, in any way, how we deal with the oil industry in Africa?
Thank you very much. Let me take us back to what transpired in UAE last year. You know, last year, I think, experienced the most aggressive campaign against production of fossil fuel. And at the end of the day, at the end of the COP28 in the UAE, there was almost a resolution to say, let us finally stop production of fossil fuel. But OPEC stood very firm. And together we're able to, to change the narrative. I remember that, we're together, OPEC members and non-OPEC members, had to collaborate to see how we can, stop that. And our contention is that, look, the world is in need of energy. Historically, no sort of energy has been completely abandoned. So fossil fuel, oil and gas cannot be the first one. That is one. And for, countries like Africa, we are victims. We cannot be made, to look like we're the culprits. If the total African emission is estimated to be about 3%, it would be absolutely, ridiculous for you to say that we should remain in poverty, we should remain in energy poverty, we should remain in the kind of low industrialization that we are.
But Minister, there's a chance for you to be able to get out of energy poverty with solar and wind.
Yeah, but for you to get to that point, you need to get the money to be able to finance the energy mix. What is in abundance in Africa is oil and gas. We also have solar, wind, hydro, all sorts of energy are possible in Africa. But Those energy sources, as that today, have limited investment. What today has substantial investment in Africa because of the long period of production of oil and gas is hydrocarbon. And our own ambition is to see how we can raise the funding required to finance our energy mix from the process of production of fossil fuel. And so it will be wrong in our opinion, even when we go to COP29, my own contention is that we will continue to say, look, we're not against energy transition. That is why even in the African continent, steps have been taken to see how production of oil and gas will be done in a cleaner, greener, and more sustainable way. In Nigeria, we have plethora of policies, plethora of laws. The PIA, in fact, prescribes clear governance structure on how oil and gas should be explored, taking into consideration the philosophy of this energy transition. But Africa, should be allowed to go at its own pace. Because today, our problem is not energy transition. What are we transiting from? We have no energy. So first of all, let's explore the oil and gas resources we have, raise the funding needed to be able to finance the solar, the wind, the hydro, and then the other sources of energy, so that we can catch up with the rest of the world. Yesterday, there was an interesting dimension, when the Andy from Cosmos Energy said, look, the rest of the world, in Nigerian parlance, wanted to do us 409. In Nigeria, 409 is like somebody trying to trick you. No country in the world is slowing down in production. One of the strongest climate envoys, is from the US. I don't want to mention his name. I can even mention him, John Kerry. He's one of the strongest, climate envoys. But US today is the highest producer of oil and gas. Charity begins at home. In Europe, they are also ramping up production. Last year, UK gave over 100 licenses for new exploration in the North Sea. Norway is ramping up production. Nobody from Europe, nobody in America has been able to stop production of oil and gas. But they want us to stop so that we can continue to depend on promises that will never be made. In any event, even if they keep those promises of giving 100 billion per year, even if you give Nigeria 100 billion a year, it's not enough for us. We have a huge population of 200 something million people that's projected to grow up to 450 by the year 2050. So we need to develop our resources, raise the funding to finance the energy mix that is required for us to be part of the train.
But if raising that funding comes with collaboration with other OPEC member states, or just purely focused with international companies?
No, we are doing whatever we are doing in collaboration with OPEC member countries, and then OPEC Plus. Because of the importance of this matter, we've now forged an alliance with countries that are not members of OPEC, where they belong to another bloc called the OPEC Plus. These days, when we meet, we have my colleague here, the president of OPEC, will speak. The leader of OPEC Plus will speak. Because we have to, come together because this thing affects our common, interest.
But go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
I want to add to what His Excellency just mentioned, that a very important point, and I mentioned in my remarks, is that our position is that climate negotiations have to take into account the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. This is enshrined in the Paris Agreement. It's very simple. And let me explain a little bit more. When we talk about historical emissions, this is key. Historical emissions of CO2 globally since the start of the Industrial Revolution, 1850, it's the G7 countries that were responsible for almost 45% of global CO2 emissions. It's not Africa. It's not OPEC either. OPEC has 12 member countries who are responsible for only 4.6% over the same time frame. And to put this into context, 12 member countries of OPEC, 4.6%. Remember this figure, please. Compare this to one country in the G7 or Europe, the United Kingdom, 4.6%. Sorry, OPEC is 4%. So 12 member countries of OPEC emitted 4%, while one country, the UK, emitted 4.6% over that time frame. So this is very important as we head into COP to keep that when our countries go, as His Excellency mentioned, we have a common positions developed through our coordination meetings that we do at the OPEC Secretariat, not only within our member countries, but also with our partners at OPEC+. And His Excellency mentioned COP28. Yes, COP28 came out with a consensus on transitioning away, but people focus only on the word transitioning away. They don't look at the rest of the statement that was agreed, which is the meat, as they say. It's not, you don't have to just take the skin off, which is transitioning away, but the meat, the actual material says you have to respect capabilities of countries. There is technology, tripling energy efficiency. So every country has its own pathway to achieve its transition goals and to meet its climate goals. So His Excellency mentioned, yes, Africa has vast resources that are required to be developed. But also when we talk about financing to deal with climate change issues, people have to invest more in technologies. Some of our member countries are well ahead in advanced stages of investing in CCUS, in direct air capture. We need to bring more of that investment into Africa in order to enable African producers to be able to produce more and getting rid of the emissions. The one important thing is I want to really emphasize on is when we talk about climate negotiations, remember that the Paris Agreement is about reducing emissions, is not about choosing a source of fuel over another source, and it's not about leaving it under the ground as some are calling for. So with that, I think it's very important to recenter the discussions in this COP or the coming COP, which will be in Brazil next year, on the key objectives of the Paris Agreement. Reduction of emissions. The problem we have is emissions. It's not oil, it's not gas. In fact, I wrote an article about this 2 days ago, which I would urge you, if you have time, to go to the OPEC website and see that all sectors globally in the industries, and all sectors have a role to play in dealing with emissions. The focus is always on oil and gas, as if we are the culprits, as Senator Heineken said. We are not the culprits, no. We are part of the solution. We need to be there at the COP discussions. We need to enable our countries to be able to develop these resources for socioeconomic development, but also cognizant of the fact that we have to find solutions to deal with climate issues.
There are a lot of non-OPEC members here, and I want you to touch on the OPEC fund. And I think many Africans have always looked to OPEC as a source of investment. And how does the OPEC Fund for International Development work, and how can African states, which as you said, which are non-members, can access those funds, and what parameters are there for them when it comes to engaging on development projects or whatnot?
Well, as I said, the OPEC fund was created in 1976 by the same founders of OPEC. And since 1976, the OPEC fund has enabled investments around the world of over $200 billion, whether it's in direct funds or even through financing, all around the world where countries need any form of developmental projects, whether it's schools, roads, even in energy projects, and even in renewable projects. So they are very active all around the world. This is part of OPEC doing good to the world, our member countries investing in places around the world to develop the simplest things that you can imagine, airports, bridges, roads, and they're active in many, many places. But as I said, they are an independent organization. They have their own management system, their own management, as OPEC Secretary General, I am not directly involved in their affairs, but we can facilitate for any country that's interested to get involved with the OPEC fund. I know the president of the OPEC fund very well, dear brother, and the OPEC fund is very keen and very active already in many African countries. But there's also another platform which I think is very important. Both their excellencies talked about our wider cooperation within OPEC+. Now, our countries have signed in 2017 the OPEC Plus agreement, which is mainly responsible for providing the stability to the global market. But 2 years later, due to that closer collaboration, our countries also developed what's called the Charter of Cooperation. Now, the Charter of Cooperation is a platform that enables, works like a bridge builder between all oil developing and oil producing countries around the world. You don't have to be a member of OPEC, but if you are a member of this charter or a signatory to this charter, you have access to meeting with all the OPEC member countries. Let me give you a good example of what came out of this OPEC charter. In 2019, when it was signed, through the charter, closer ties were developed by many countries, OPEC member countries with non-OPEC member countries. I can give you the names if you want, but there are many cases where OPEC members have been able to become investors in those countries. So this is another way, another modality of bringing investments from some of our OPEC member countries into these non-OPEC member countries that have signed the Charter of Cooperation. OPEC is always about supporting development, investments, especially in the energy. And let me stress the fact that is not known to many, that even our member countries are very heavily investing very heavily into renewable energy projects. Now you might say, yes, OPEC is just about oil or maybe gas. But if you look at some of our members, they are big investors in renewables. That's because we believe in what I said in my opening remarks, that the world is going to need all forms of energy. And we encourage all forms of energy, all sources of energy, including renewables. We are not against renewable energy. We just believe that the world is going to need everything. But we are against the view that the world will not need oil. That's why we continue to encourage these important and timely investments that have been falling behind in the past years because of a misguided narrative that the world is going to grow and the world is going to move away within the next 5-6 years or move away from fossil fuels. Simple fact. Today, the global energy mix is 80% fossil fuels, still. 30 years ago, it was still 80%. And you know how much money has been spent over the last 20 years on transitioning? $10 trillion globally. Yet the energy mix still remains dominated by fossil fuels. Again, I'm not saying that we are against EVs or OPEC is against renewable energies. No. We support them because we know that the world's going to need every form of energy. So in that respect, back to your question, the OPEC fund is engaged in promoting renewable energy projects, socio-economic developmental projects all around the world, and as well as the Charter of Cooperation, where we welcome oil producers to come to this platform, and this will open the door and the horizon for engagement with OPEC members.
Mr. Heineken, I think we're about to start wrapping up, but there's been an issue where I think you were heavily involved in working with across Africa on OPEC benchmarks. And I think maybe you and the Secretary General might want to have a discussion on how those benchmarks are working, the process in getting through, in establishing the benchmarks for OPEC countries, and if African nations are being hindered from producing the hydrocarbons they need.
Well, this is one of the most important, principles in OPEC. From time to time, OPEC member countries will meet and then determine, the quota for each country for the following year. And this is normally based on studies that have been carried out to enable OPEC make projections. And look, this is how the market is going to be. This may likely be the global demand. If we peg it this way, then there'll be price stability. It's one thing to produce, another thing is for you to have value for what you're producing. And you may saturate the market, with your products, and then it has no value. And so it's simple economics. So OPEC, maybe you will speak more about, as the Secretary General, you will speak more about, the principles guiding, the quantum of, quota that is given to each country. But I remember very well the last year when we had our OPEC meeting, Nigeria was contending that we want 1.7 million barrels a day. Well, before then, OPEC had set up, a study group. OPEC had authorized 2 companies to go and, work with a few countries to assess their capabilities. One thing is for you to be given a quota. Another thing is whether you have capacity to be able to meet that quota. But if you give a capacity that you are unable to meet, it also comes with its own implications. It could lead to, to supply shortages. That may also, lead to price volatility and all that. So while we're contending that we needed, 1.7, OPEC said, we have no problem, we'll give you. But even the one we have given to you, you haven't been able to meet it. So rationalize why we should give you more. Same thing happened to Angola. Angola was asking for more, and then the same principles that were applied to Nigeria was applied to them. Question was that you say you want more, but you were part of those who agreed that, look, let's set up 2 committees, and let us authorize 2 companies that will come and work with you to assess whether, even if you are doing 1 million barrels today, you have capacity based on what you have put on the ground to do 2 million barrels by next year. If that happens, we will give you the 2 million. But we don't want to give you 2 million, which will form part of our total calculation. At the end of the day, the result will be price, instability that will affect, the global, market. So OPEC, as far as I'm concerned, hasn't been a problem. Speaking from Nigeria, OPEC hasn't been a problem. In fact, I'm looking forward to the situation where I will produce more than the OPEC quota, so that Nigeria will now be subject of discussion. Then I can have demonstrated to them that I now have capacity to do more, so give me more. So OPEC, as far as I'm concerned, hasn't been a problem. It's we as countries, based on different factors, that are struggling to meet our own OPEC quotas. Maybe.
Secretary General.
Thank you, Senator Heineken. I think you made it very easy for me to tackle this point, because you're right. OPEC has very clear, transparent systems to establish the production targets for member countries. It's one thing to have a capacity to produce and meet actually that production. It's another thing to want to have a higher, of course, which requires investments. But the processes are in place, and they've been in place for many, many years. As Senator Heyer can give a very clear example, what we did, I think it was last year. Transparently, we engage with industry experts to assess the production capacities of countries, and the results are final and binding as per the agreement between the ministers when they sit and discuss. Now the Secretariat gets involved with this process because we have access to serve all our member countries. But the same process that applies to Nigeria applies to all the member countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's UAE, whether it's Iran, Iraq, Kuwait. So it's a fair and transparent process that applies in establishing the production figures or targets. But having the capacity requires investments, and that's a totally different matter. To be able to invest, to have a higher capacity and then request a higher production number for the future is another matter, and that requires hard work and investments and FIDs and planning and all of that. For investments, I think it's important to realize that we are now seeing more and more opportunities and interest from OPEC member countries to invest in other OPEC member countries. And let me give you a very good example. Our biggest producer, Saudi Arabia, has now been sending a big team to the Africa Energy Week every year. In fact, I think my colleagues there from the Saudi delegation are sitting right there in the back, from the ministry and from Saudi Aramco, as well as, I believe, representatives from the embassy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I believe we've had people from Abu Dhabi, from Kuwait coming to Africa. This is one of the areas I've been trying to work on as well, to bring this bridge, to bring OPEC member country investors. So try to develop the NOC cooperation as well. For many years, IOCs, of course, have been doing a great job here in Africa, local companies, of course, but I think it's time also that we start to develop and focus on doing NOC to NOC member country cooperation. We're moving along that direction. But also I would encourage inter-African NOC cooperation. I think that's an area where not just only in pipelines or in logistical services, but also in terms of best practices. I mean, we have Nigeria, the largest producer in Africa, Algeria, Sonatrach, Libya, many countries, Sonangol, of course, which can help the smaller producers like Equatorial Guinea or be it Gabon, if I may, Mr. President, or Congo. And I think this is another area which could be explored and developed going down further down the road in the future.
Secretary General, we are wrapping up. We have 5 more minutes. I want to switch a little bit to go back to Baku. We're heading to Baku next week. I will start, and I'll close with you, Secretary General, but I'll start with you, Senator Heineken. What do you expect from OPEC members countries to be our position, and Africa, to be our position in Baku as we go to COP in Baku? And I think the same question for the president of the conference and to the Secretary General. What do you expect, or what message should Africa and the and OPEC member countries take to Baku? And I think I'll close with you. I'll start with Senator Heineken.
Thank you very much. You know, as we got to for the COP29, our position in Africa is that we want to continue to fight against energy poverty in Africa. And the only way we can defeat energy poverty in Africa is for us to sustain investment, you know, in oil and gas, where we can raise the funding required to finance our energy mix. We are victims. We should even be consulted about transition, because we are nowhere. And so we must get energy first before we talk about, you know, transition. That will be our message. The 600 million people living without, you know, electricity. The almost 900 million people or more who have no means of, you know, clean cooking gas and all that. Our immediate priority as government. So as we go to, you know, COP29, we from the African perspective and OPEC, you know, is that allow us to continue to invest in oil and gas for the benefit of the economies of the respective African countries.
Secretary General, your response and also the final words to close this session, Your Excellency.
Thank you, NJ. Very simple. I think, of course, it will be held in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is a member country, a partner in the Declaration of Cooperation, or OPEC Plus. So first of all, we wish our brothers in Azerbaijan a successful COP29, just like we had in our member country, the UAE. That's, of course, paramount. It has to be successful. But for us as OPEC member countries, I think it's important to get our opinions heard, our voice heard. As you heard from the distinguished ministers, fairness, equity are paramount in these discussions. I mentioned this earlier on, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and respecting the capabilities of nations and their requirements is also of paramount importance during the discussions. We also believe it's important to recenter discussions on providing the right finance to developing countries, of course, including African countries. So we look at it from an overall OPEC member country perspective, of course, without just focusing on Africa, but we all as oil producers are together in this. And we will do everything as the OPEC Secretariat to help our member countries. We are already in the process of doing several coordination meetings, including with the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, with our member countries and with our non-OPEC partners, to be able to come up with a position that defends the interest of our countries.
Your Excellency, I want to thank you and all the ministers for a very spirited dialogue. And if anybody doubts how dialogue in the energy industry should happen, this is how we expect it. Very pragmatic, forthright, but also in a less polarizing and demonizing fashion. And I think OPEC has demonstrated that together with your ministers, and you should be proud what this organization has done, not just to Africa, but to the world when it comes to global energy security. Could you please join me in thanking our panelists for an amazing discussion?